In the 2014 application, my entire application was one thing. The overarching theme was that I am determined to bring my family's business to the US. And then everything I would talk about, whether my past experiences, whether my hopes and dreams and aspirations, whether my action plan, what am I going to do in business school, how will the business school help me, all those questions would ultimately serve that one purpose. So when you read an application, you realize this person is absolutely committed to this one goal, and he or she will do everything in their powers to achieve that goal. Versus in my 2012 application, I was focusing more on what I had done. It's not like I changed dramatically from 2012 to 2014. I was the same person. I think the process that Crack The MBA and you sort of gave me, compelled me in that direction. When you organize your thoughts in a way that is, and then you can really build a story which is coherent, consistent, and clear. I think oftentimes we make mistakes of looking at goals from the perspective of what the world values. And so I'm not saying status is not important. Status is certainly an important driver for a lot of us, but perhaps should not be the main driver. That's something to think about. Am I really driven by status? Am I becoming a consultant because I want to tell people how great life I have? Do I want to be an investment banker because I want to make money? And why do I want to make money? Is that to reflect status, or is that to do something else? Any plan that doesn't involve anything larger than yourself is perhaps not a great plan. And so eventually good goals are goals that make you feel content and satisfied.
Welcome to the Crack The MBA Show. My name is Nupur Gupta and I'm your host. Our guest today is Gourav Soni, who graduated with an MBA degree from Columbia Business School in 2016. Gourav holds a Bachelor of Business Studies from the College of Business Studies, Delhi University, and a certification from the Gemological Institute of America, or GIA. Prior to pursuing the MBA, Gourav was a founder in the credit card loyalty and reward space. Thereafter, he worked in his family's jewelry business, 64 Facets, taking it online. At CBS, Gourav was involved in the leadership teams of the Luxury Marketing Group, LEF, Family Business Group, and the Entrepreneurship Group. Through his MBA and since graduating, Gourav has expanded the firm's operations to 18 US locations, including many Neiman Marcus stores. Welcome, Gourav. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Nupur.
Awesome. To begin, Gourav, can you tell our audience a fun fact about yourself?
I think I'm the biggest MS Dhoni fan out there in the world. I don't think anybody can surpass me as an MS Dhoni fan.
Oh, why do you say that? Is there like a backstory behind it?
That's what my friends tell me because I apparently can connect any positive thing in this world to MS Dhoni.
Okay, hoping for like a connection even through the conversation today then.
I mean, it might come up. So
yeah. I'm a huge cricket fan myself. So yeah, that just makes me very happy. Let's hope he continues to play the IPL, right?
I think he should become Prime Minister.
Who knows? Never know.
Yeah.
Okay, super. All right. So moving to the admission side of things, Gourav, can you share a little bit about when you decided to pursue an MBA and what your motivations were?
Right. So after when I went to GIA in 2007, right after college, I remember I used to sort of walk down Fifth Avenue and look at these stores, and there's a luxury department stores, and I was like, I wish someday we could bring our jewelry to these stores. And I used to talk to folks on 47th Street, which is the Diamond District in New York, and ask them about how could I ever what's the pathway to doing that? And people would give me mixed responses, mostly leaning towards that's just too far a milestone to reach. So in any case, I went through a period of trying different things. Like you mentioned, I ran a startup in LA for a couple of years, and that failed. And I came back to India as well. And right after my startup had failed, I'd applied once because eventually I really did want to bring our family's business outside of India. And the United States is an obvious first choice because 55% of the world's fine jewelry is sold in the US. And it's a very mature market. There's place for new players to come in. And so it just seemed like doing an MBA in the US would be an obvious pathway to achieving that. And so I first applied in 2012, right after my startup, we sort of shut it down and didn't get in. And then in 2014, after a couple of years of running the business in India, sort of creating the basic capabilities that it would need to enter a foreign market. So I sort of worked on the ground in India. And then 2014 is when I met you, and successfully we created an application that was accepted, and then that was it. So the primary goal was to bring our family's business to the US.
Understood. Great. So, Gaurav, once you had decided to apply, what were the main actions that you took?
I think my approach, I would talk about this 2014 application because I thought that was just the entire process was just more thoughtful. And the first step I did was, which was different from the 2012 application, was to figure out, sort of understand that I do need guidance, sort of that realization that it's not something that I was prepared or ready at the time to do on my own. And so I asked one of my friends, Priyanshu, who was also a Crack the MBA alumnus. He said he recommended that I should meet with you. And so that was step one. And then I think after that, like I did pretty much follow the guidelines that you, Crack the MBA, had set for me. And I think that besides that, there was also like a lot of networking that had to be done in terms of reaching out to, students, current students, ex-students from the business schools that I was applying to. So I think the entire process was just a lot more organized and it was just more thoughtful. So I don't know if you want me to go into details of every step that, the entire process of applying in 2014.
Right. No. We can probably get into that, with the specifics.
I think the key thing would be to really realize that I needed sort of guidance.
Understood.
And get the right guidance is very important.
Understood. Helpful. And Gaurav, do you have any advice related to the GMAT?
In terms of like the preparation of it?
Yeah, the preparation of it, the mindset, anything which you think could be helpful for prospective applicants.
So I think strategically, there's no way around it but to actually prepare for it. And tactically, for me, I can share exactly what I did. I basically gave myself 3 months to prepare, which is seemed to be, and that would obviously depend on your starting point. Like, were you comfortable with mathematics and English to begin with? And that really is the extent of it. It's math and English, critical thinking. And so depending on where you think you are, you might sort of set your own timeline. But having a timeline and which is thoughtful based on where you are currently. And also it has to work with your overall timeline of applications and whatnot. You want to have, ideally, I would think you would want to have your results, your scores before you set your schools. It sort of does give you a range of schools that you can or should not apply to based on your score. And then sticking to it. Oftentimes, just like any other academic pursuit, we slip. It's okay to slip, but it's important to stick to it as much as you can.
Yeah. How far in advance of the applications would you recommend that people be done with their GMAT? So like, let's say they're applying round 1 in, say, September first week. So ideally, when do you think they should be done by?
I think you should have it before you finalize your list of schools. That's what I would recommend personally. And it's just because it's not the only component of the application. It is a significant, people do talk about it. People do take it like admission. I've spoken with people who work in the admissions office at Columbia and I've sort of just asked point blank, hey, is GMAT score, do they really matter? And the straight answer is absolutely yes. Like there's no two ways about it. So getting that done before you finalize your school list, I think this is important.
Understood. So speaking of the school list, right? What was your process to come up with the school list and to select your schools?
I think the key, because the goal was very clear that, we wanted to bring our family business to the US, and our industry was luxury retail industry. And so one of the filters really was like which schools offer a formal program in luxury retail. And my criteria was like, I don't want, because pretty much all business schools these days have a marketing club, and marketing is traditionally still taught in every business school, but marketing with a specific focus on luxury goods would be a key factor. And frankly, I didn't necessarily know that business schools offered formal luxury specific, academic programs. But so I began with like a few known universities that I had visited in the past when I was in the US. And then I was just surprised. Once I realized that some schools do offer a luxury retail academic program and then other activities and other opportunities surrounding those programs, then it became an automatic first filter. But then I was surprised a lot of schools actually did offer. So then the other criteria came. So, Board had a program like that. NYU did, Columbia obviously did, even Kellogg. So then I sort of added other filters. One other filter was family business management program. So because I come from a family business background, I figured that might be a useful area of study for me. And so that became another criteria. And then location for our industry in New York is an obvious choice. It's an obvious first step. So that sort of put Columbia and NYU on top spot automatically. So those 3 criteria, I think, would be, and I think it's also important to have, you can have as many criteria as you want. One thing that may be useful is to really have 1, 2, or 3 top criteria that are like super important and rank them in the order of priority. And the sooner you do that, the better, because you don't want to be influenced by new criteria that come down the road that may not be as important. So keeping your eye on those important criteria is important.
Okay, fair. And why CBS? You were in the fortunate position to have multiple offers. So maybe you can first share how many schools you applied to and what the outcomes were, and then why did you pick CBS?
So I think I got very good advice from you at the time. And I don't know if you still directly, are involved in Acing. But at the time we discussed to have not too many schools. And I think we ended up with a short list of 4 schools that sort of fit all the top 3 criteria. Not all three, but at least 2 of the 3 criteria. And so Wharton, Kellogg, NYU, and Columbia were the 4 schools that I applied to. So I got admission offers from Kellogg, NYU, and Columbia. And Wharton, I got an invitation for interview, but didn't make it further. But then I knew Columbia was like first choice. And so when they accepted it, that was the end of that pursuit. Why CBS? CBS had checked all the important criteria. So it had a luxury retail program. It has a family business manager program. There's entrepreneurship is a big emphasis. And then it's in New York City. It's an actual university. I think the tilt really came when I visited New York prior to even receiving my admissions offers. I reached out to professors who taught these classes at these universities. So I didn't get an opportunity to attend a class in Wharton, but at Kellogg, at Columbia, and at NYU, I actually sat in a class. They allow you to audit a class. And so I wasn't sure if this would be an option, but like taking a chance, making an ask is something that I highly encourage, just like what's the worst outcome? And so all the professors have their email addresses on university websites in their department pages. And you just copy an email and request them, hi, I'm going to be in New York next week. Do you mind if I audit your class? And surprisingly, most people are okay with it. In India, growing up in India, there was this whole culture of classrooms being sort of off limits to people who are not in that classroom. And that's culturally not a thing in the US, I think. So people can come in and audit classes. And so my experience inside of Katie Maison Rouge, who teaches the luxury marketing class at business school, Columbia Business School. Like I said, I attended all these classrooms in Kellogg, NYU, and Columbia. My experience in Columbia was distinctly more informative to me, also because the kind of guest lectures the professor would bring in the classroom. And I sort of also talked to the other students about what their experience would like. That's like sitting in a gold mine looking for gold, right? You have all the current students who are very willing. You're in the classroom, you're not like bugging them over email, right? So that opportunity is tremendous. And then I think if you really like that class, and it gives you an opportunity of also mentioning that in your application that, hey, I was in that class. And I think that is a strong point. And even the professors are sort of willing to write and lend a hand of support. Katie did say that she spoke to somebody in admissions. I don't know if that's true or not, but I think it is. I'm just saying these things create opportunities that would otherwise just not be there.
Yeah, so true. Okay, so Gaurav, you mentioned that you were a reapplicant, right? Having applied 2 years prior to that. Can you speak about what were 3 things you did differently as a reapplicant, which led to your success the second time around?
At the time when I was applying the second time, I think the process was much more thoughtful. It comes down to presenting a story which is coherent, easy to understand, and compelling. And I think looking back, I think about that a lot. I get that question a lot. What is the secret sauce of the perfect application? Simply, and I've been trying to think about that answer a lot because, like I said, I get asked that question a lot. And I think it comes down to really one key ingredient of an application is having one story. Like it has to be one story. Typically, and I look back at my 2012 application, there are many stories in it, and they're not necessarily all serving one purpose.
Okay, and can you expound on that when you say multiple stories? Like maybe like what would be a couple of those, for example? Like not in detail, but just like as examples.
Right. So in the 2014 application, my entire application was one thing. The overarching theme was that I am determined to bring my family's business to the US. And then everything I would talk about, whether my past experiences, whether my hopes and dreams and aspirations, whether my action plan, what am I going to do in business school? How will the business school help me? All those questions would ultimately serve that one purpose. So when you read an application, you realize this person is absolutely committed to this one goal, and he or she will do everything in their powers to achieve that goal. Ultimately, what from my conversations with business school folks is that what they're looking for is they want people to succeed at the business school. And success means I think half the thing about being successful in life is knowing what you want. And then the rest is just figuring out how to get it. And so if you show in your application that you have what you want figured out already and it's clear, you are more likely to be a successful MBA versus in my 2012 application, I was focusing more on what I had done. It's not like I changed dramatically from 2012 to 2014. I was the same person. I mean, I barely did anything. All my stories were pre-2012. So they already existed in my application in 2012. All the things I had done, all the critical moments in my life where I did something that led to an outcome, whether from which either I learned something something or I exhibited characteristics that are desirable by a business school. The focus was so much on the what and how I led my life. I recommend this book, Started with Why by Simon Sinek. I don't know. Simon talks about that. The why is so important. And at the time, like I said, in 2014, I wasn't thinking that I need to start with why. I think the process that Crack the MBA and you like sort of gave me, compelled me in that direction. When you organize your thoughts in a way that is, and then you can really build a story which is coherent, consistent, and clear. But in retrospect, I realized that my entire application is very, very clear why I want to do the MBA. And I think that is one question that needs to be told multiple times and sort of supported with everything you say and do should serve that one purpose, that of why you're doing the MBA. I think that was the key difference.
Very helpful. And Gaurav, how did you conduct your introspection process?
Again, I think the tools were provided by Crack the MBA. Those were very important. And I think the process is very important. There's no way around the process. So my hunch is always to like sort of get a shortcut around and get around things, because I feel like I can talk my way through or wing my way through things. And I realized that true introspection is just laborious. You need to put time and effort. There's no shortcut around it. You cannot do it while doing other things, while taking a walk or while watching TV. It just won't happen. I think I don't know of any other way but to toil, but to sit down and like put in the hours and just get it done. Like you really have to take time out where your entire concentration is on this one thing. It's like digging up things about you. One thing is to remember things and try to like recall things. And the other thing is to actually relive them. And when you relive them, you get nuances that really make a story. The difference between a good story, you can think of it as like a book or a movie. A well-written story is something that has a nuance that defines you, that defines like how you think. And those things can only come out with a labor when you really like put thought and time towards it. There's no two ways about it.
Gaurav, what were those 2 or 3 stories, those nuanced stories, as you were saying, that you told in your admissions essays that differentiated you from other applicants, you feel?
I think the key idea is that these stories, the nuance really is in terms of reflecting your true learnings from any event. So for example, whether it's a success story or a story of failure, the nuance really is how you thought about it. What was your thought process? So for example, I would mention, and obviously my application, the goal was really to every story, every incident, and every learning had to serve the purpose of bringing my family's business to the US. That was the key. So I talked about instances where I would have a challenge with, let's say, a customs officer in India and how I would navigate that challenge and come out of it. And then reflecting on my thought process, like how was I thinking through that event? Not just what I did and what the outcome was, but how did I arrive at that decision point, I think is also important. And those are the things that can really reflect on how you think, which I think is ultimately what matters. Do you fit culturally? Do you fit from a thought process perspective? Do you fit what is seen, or do you have a deliberative thought process? Ultimately, it comes down to that. Are you making decisions based on short-term gains, or like what is your thought process? And those things, the way you make decisions and how you reflect it in your application, how you present it in your application can really show how you really think. And I think it's good for yourself. I think everybody should do that process regardless of whether or not you're doing an MBA or applying for an MBA. I think it's an exercise that we should do regardless who we are and what we're doing, whether it is instances from my startup. And I'm not sure like how much detail you want me to go in, but the idea is that you think through those incidents. When we were trying to raise capital for our startup and we couldn't do it, and then what was the situation? And then again, what decisions you make at that time are really important. How you come up with those decisions, how you talk about that. And sometimes I think we tend to focus too much on our achievements, on the positive things that we have achieved in our life, and try to present an image that I'm awesome and I should absolutely be in Columbia Business School. I think that may be a misconception, because I think sometimes stories where you reflect that you grew as a person, you realize a mistake, I think those can be really more powerful in terms of reflecting that you are able to learn, you're able to change, and you're able to adapt and grow. Not to say that
Gaurav,
you create those stories.
Yeah. And Gaurav, just so that listeners can better understand what the growth is, right? So you talked about shutting your startup down, right? So what kind of growth or what learning were you able to speak about?
Essentially, what had happened was we were trying to raise capital, and there were 2 VC firms in Los Angeles that we had met, and they did a soft commitment to us to give us a nice fat check to take our company to the next stage. And then there's a process called diligence, where the VCs speak with all the partners partners and all the customers that we already had gathered. And so to verify that all our claims are actually true. And then in that, just smack in the middle of that process, a company had one of our major partners based on which we would be getting a big customer base. Actually, there was an internal problem that they had in terms of top management where the person I was directly working with was let go of. And then the person who came in that position wanted to just not have any partnerships that person had entered into. The agenda was for that to die. At that point, we had two options. One was to come clean with our investors that this is what had happened, or the other was to sort of try and figure out a cover up. Not a cover up really, like trying to figure out like how to make this work. So I went in to the city that the partner company was, tried to have conversations. I tried everything in my power to save the day, so to speak. But the immediate reaction was not to have the diligence go through. The decision I made was, hey, I need to call up my investors, sort of tell them exactly what's going on. This is not something that they should discover, because the company was still going to go through the process of diligence and everything. But I knew that this partnership would eventually end, even if we would raise the capital, because the diligence would succeed, but the partnership will not. And I knew that. And so either I withhold that information because I'm not 100% certain that the partnership won't work. I mean, there is a slim chance that the partnership might work and the diligence would pass, and then we would raise the capital, and it's like pushing something over to the future, like we'll deal with it later. But because I had a feeling that this partnership is not going to work, and the feeling was strong enough to compel me to call up my investors and say, hey, folks, this is what I feel. That down the line, this partnership is not going to work because of this incident. And the investment didn't go through. And then there was a few other things happened. And I think by the time I was already like, it's time to close shop. And so the reflection there really is about, you just have to take responsibility and ownership of, and the responsibility is not just about doing the right thing. It's about, sharing information and who are like, what's the long-term picture? Like eventually it's in my self-interest to have done that. If I didn't do that later on, I would antagonize these investors, and I'm creating a reputation that will follow me for the rest of my life. And so having those perspectives in that crunch moment, so those things reflect well in your application, I think.
That's helpful. Failure is not something people speak about often. So it's a helpful take. And Gaurav, a lot of times when people are applying, they may be in their mid-20s, late 20s, fairly junior in their roles, right? So they may not have a lot of leadership experience. How can applicants demonstrate leadership? How can they dig out those key anecdotes, that can help set them apart? If you have any advice on that front, that'd be great.
There are two aspects to finding anecdotes, right? I mean, one thing is you have to put yourself out there, like, get involved in things. It's very difficult to create stories, and the only way to create stories, and they don't have to be, leadership is not necessarily just reflected in a work environment. It can be amongst friends, it can be any social groups that you are part of. But then the idea is that you need to get involved. And I think today more and more people are, I think, involved in some way or the other, whether it's digitally or in some capacity. So I think step one would be to get involved in things that create opportunities for you to work with others in a capacity where you can lead something, an initiative, a cause, a discussion. It could be anything. There are more opportunities today, I think, than there ever were before. And so one thing is to get involved for sure. And then when you're involved, I mean, leadership starts with just making decisions that involves more than just you. That's basically it. And so if you're making decisions that affects anybody more than you, that is an act of leadership. And how you behave in that moment can reflect on the strength of your leadership character. I think if you think in fundamental terms, like what is leadership and how do I reflect the character of my leadership, you will find more anecdotes in your life. And again, it comes back to the earlier point about really there's no two ways about it but to toil and go through the process of reliving those moments, and then you'll find the answer.
Gaurav, can you share any advice for applicants to identify their true north? I mean, for you, it sounds like it was very clear. Maybe you had a way that you thought about it, or maybe it just occurred to you as an epiphany. But a lot of people, it's not as obvious. So do you have any advice how people can identify that?
It's a difficult thing. It's not easy. And that's why you said what you said. I think the process, there's no one straight path to finding your north. Like, I think you have to arrive to it with different approaches. One is you sort of like look back at your life. What are the things that you have done that make you feel that you are in it, that you are really involved in it, and you really feel that if you are having second thoughts about something that you're doing, if you're not enjoying something you're doing, that's one indicator that that's something that's not for you. Or if you are enjoying, then that's an indicator. So maybe start with making a short list. What are the few things that I enjoy doing? And it can involve anything. It can involve work. It can involve your personal hobbies. It could be anything. anything. What aspects of your current work? I'm assuming people applying for MBA are doing some sort of a work, whether it's profit, non-profit, business, jobs, whatever. So what you're doing, what are the aspects of your current life, current work life, or current professional life, or even personal life that sort of stand out as it's like a dream exercise where you dream about your ideal self and think about what would you be doing from the time you wake up to the time you sleep. What are the things you would be doing? Do you see yourself out in the fields? Do you see yourself sitting in a room? Do you see yourself looking at a computer? Do you see like what are the broad indicators that might help you to zero in on, you know what, this is not for me? And so if you don't like sitting at home, probably a job that is probably an industry that requires you to be sitting in front of a computer and taking Zoom calls all day long is not for you. And not ignoring those, we get those feelings if you really look inwards. And I think oftentimes we make mistakes of looking at goals from the perspective of what the world values. And so I'm not saying status is not important. Status is certainly an important driver for a lot of us, but perhaps should not be the main driver. That's something to think about. Am I really driven by status? Am I becoming a consultant because I want to tell people how great life I have? Do I want to be an investment banker because I want to make money? And why do I want to make money? Is that to reflect status, or is that to do something else? So like, I'll give you an example. I want to be an investment banker. Let's say I come to that conclusion, and then I'm trying to figure out why I want to be an investment banker. So I could take two paths. One path would be, oh, I want to be an investment banker because investment bankers get paid a lot. Okay, they get paid $400,000 a year. All right, what am I going to do with that $400,000 a year? I'm going to get a fancy car. I'm going to get a fancy house, and I'm going to travel the world and have a lot of fun and enjoyment and all of that. The other goal is I'm going to take that money and do something with it. Now, I suspect that the goals that are ultimately fulfilling, and I'm just speaking from personal experience, is that any plan that doesn't involve anything larger than yourself is perhaps not a great plan. And so eventually good goals are goals that make you feel content and satisfied. That's what I think. Again, it's not like I thought this through when I was applying to business school or earlier in my life. These are reflections looking backwards. It worked out great for me. And I think I perhaps didn't think of my goal too far out. It was just because I enjoyed doing that. I enjoyed the aspects of the business that I was working on. I enjoyed my conversations with people. I enjoyed finding solutions to problems. Those were like the things that I wanted to do, that I enjoyed doing. And I got lucky that I found success in it, and I found contentment in it. But looking backward, I think the fact that this business supports so many families and individuals who work in our business, that's a source of satisfaction for me. And so I feel like this is a multi-pronged approach. It can be, you can identify specific things and tasks that give you joy. If you're a person who enjoys conversations, then perhaps industries where you are talking to people, negotiating with people can give you a lot of satisfaction. I always find it hard to give a summary statement. And I think in this case, the summary statement would be to really, you can like go into why you're doing something and, have a goal that if you have that clarity, that's fantastic. If you don't have that clarity just yet, then you can focus in on the specific parts of a daily life that you would enjoy, and then try and figure out which industry, which direction would that be most likely be the outcome. Again, long processes, you have to be thoughtful. You have to sit down and think, discuss. A lot of times these discussions should be with friends, with close friends and family. They also sometimes give you a perspective on you that you don't have. So the fact that I'm the biggest MS Dhoni fan is told by my friends. I didn't realize that. The point is that sometimes just asking your close friends can give you insights into yourself that may be useful in this decision-making process.
A lot of times it's very easy to just follow the herd mentality, right? Specifically, the pressures are high when you're at business school. So just staying strong in the face of those pressures, I think that can be key.
Oftentimes I would have chats, in business school, and I've seen people change their original intent of going to business school, like more often than not. Perhaps because they come to realize that the things that I thought would be enjoyable are not necessarily the case, and that's fine. I just think that the more time we spend, the less likely we would be to be in a situation where we would change our mindset midway. You should absolutely change your mindset midway if you feel like you need to. But wouldn't it be nicer to not have been in that position, because then you have the full 2 years to explore and go after that specific thing that you're going for.
Or you talked about your school visits, right? And the way you reached out to professors. I also remember, I always thought of you as like a master networker. So if you could share some advice on how prospective applicants can have success in their outreach to students
Mhm.
and alumni, how much outreach should they actually have? How much is too much?
So there are a few things here. I think, and I'm not naming them in any order of priorities, but I think they're all equally important. One thing is email writing skills. It's a sub part of communication. I think it's a very, very important part because most of our communication, especially introductions these days, happen through emails. And especially if you're doing a cold email, which it's not necessarily a cold email because there's some basis for which you would be contacting people in these universities, whether they're professors or current students. These people you're going to email, they don't know you exist. And so working on your email writing skills, how can you draft an email? Oftentimes I read emails that are not drafted well. And I think that can reduce the likelihood of somebody responding to you. Ultimately, you want to do everything you can in your power to increase the likelihood of a positive outcome of your action. And so one action would be to make sure that you write good emails. A good email is short, it has no grammar errors, and it is clear. Sometimes I read an email and I don't know what the other person wants. And then that is a challenge because then if in that moment I'm in a rush, you know what, that email gets tossed. That's the fact. If I see an email that is clear, the question, what you want is clear, and I get to it within a minute, then there's a good shot that I'll say, you know what, sure, how about next week? That's really, really important. I think how you go about developing that skill is, I'll leave it to you. I'm sure you can figure that out. One way is just to be thoughtful about it. Read the email the way you would read if you were, just imagine you got this email from someone and do you understand the point? And oftentimes we miss, even if we did this exercise of thinking about the email coming from myself, because I know what this email talks about, you almost sort of assume that the other person will get it. So it's a hard skill to develop, but you can develop it. It's just you have to work on it.
The
Get
curse of
feedback from
knowledge.
you just have to get feedback from friends who can give you actual feedback, not people. And by the way, if the people you get feedback from, that's an interesting set. It's a side note. Make sure you have somebody there are three types of feedback. One is always finding flaws. One is always not finding flaws. And the third is sometimes finding flaws and sometimes not finding flaws. I think the third one is perhaps the one you should have. You may or may not have the first two. The third one you absolutely need. Sometimes when you're down, you might need somebody who just tells everything is awesome. So you might need all three. In this particular case, I think you need somebody who can be critical thinker. That's one. Writing good emails for sure. The other point I think that I liked was that you said, is there such a thing like over networking? And I think there is. And the way I would think that something is over networking is reaching out to anybody and just spraying and praying. That's not a good strategy. You have to, before you reach out to me, you need at least one reason why you're reaching out to me. Not just because I went to Columbia and you want to get to Columbia. That's not a good enough reason. There has to be something else. So for example, if somebody reaches out to me saying, hey, I'm going to Columbia and I'm looking to be in investment management, that's a bad outreach. Nobody should be reaching out to me writing about their goals. If somebody wants to go to Columbia for investment management, they should not reach out to me. For me, you reach out if you need perspectives on life of a student who comes from India and lives in New York. That's a good reason to reach out to me. Family business management, yes. Luxury marketing, absolutely. But anything else, there are other people. There are 700 students every year who graduate out of Columbia Business School. So if you are not finding anybody who has something other than just being at Columbia Business School, then you're doing lazy work. That email that I got about investment management, particularly I remember it because I'm like, come on, man, you cannot be reaching out to me because then you're spraying and praying. You have just have this Excel sheet with emails of every Columbia student out there in the world. And that's not a good idea. You're just not doing diligent work. If you're not willing to put in effort and time in your own future, how do you expect me to put in effort and time in your future? That's preposterous to me, to be honest. And so that would be over networking. So making sure that the person you're reaching out to. So I give examples. When I was applying to Columbia the second time, I reached out to students who were in the masterclass, the luxury marketing masterclass with Ketty, and had gone on to work in the luxury industry. Right? That would the person, I can really tell them hey, what you are doing is exactly what I want to do. And so then I'm compelled that, okay, somebody wants to know what I have done and it's useful to them. I'm compelled, I'm almost I'm forced to tell you what I did. I got a call from a student at Columbia Business School. She's from India and she wants to launch her family's fine jewelry business in the US. It cannot get more photocopy of what exactly I wanted to do, right? And so we talked about, I shared resources around immigration, company formation, all the people you should meet in business school. These are the professors. These are the I basically, gave her my entire blueprint because she had done the research. She figured out who I was, what I had done. She clearly is dedicated to what she wants to do. So I have no reason not to sort of help her out. That is the true nature of good network. You do your work, you do your background studies, you give me a compelling reason to take out time from my day and give it to you. And the only way I would do that is if you reflect to me that you have done your absolute best in reaching out the right people to ask these questions.
And how many conversations per school do you think prospective applicants should plan for?
I don't know if I know a good number of those conversations. The criteria for selecting people would be there's no need to repeat the same answer. Like, let's say you have gotten in touch with, in my case, I was looking for somebody who had taken the Masterclass. So once I found one person and who gave me a satisfactory, insight into it, and I felt it like, there's not anything more to know. Just like contacting people for the sake of, increasing numbers and adding more names is not necessarily the criteria. Would be, is there something that I don't know that I can know from this person? So if person A who you've spoken with has already given you a very good exhaustive account and you feel it, then I think it's fine to just let it go end at once. Sometimes there may be sub groups within a group that you are reaching out to, and they may have some insight to share and you feel that you need to know something else. Then, so it basically comes down to need based, do you need to know something more that you don't already know from the website and from other resources? Please do not ask people that you speak with things that are information, facts and figures that are available on the website. I hope people are not doing it anymore. I still get it when I'm speaking with people on the phone. So that is something that is not reflective, doesn't reflect well on your thought process. Or not thought process, actually, on the amount of effort you put in.
Yeah, you probably don't want to ask them to review your essays either.
No. Oh, yes. Please.
Yeah.
Please.
Awesome.
I mean, if you become best friends for some reason, that's a different story, but that's not going to be the case most of the times.
Absolutely. So, Gaurav, do you have any advice on how candidates can ace their interviews?
There are some basics, like, one thing is you absolutely want to make sure that everything you talk about is consistent with the story you have told through your application. It's important not to exhibit other things that you might be doing. You may have a plan B or plan C, but those plans are for times when plan A doesn't work. So at the time of an interview, you have to truly believe in plan A. And if you don't believe in your plan A and you digress into plan Bs and plan Cs, it can reflect that plan A may not be as appealing to you. Confidence in something is not necessarily showing that you're too aggressive or too cocky about what you're talking about. Confidence before you're doing it and presented in the right way can simply reflect your conviction and your dedication to that plan A. If you talk to people and they sort of spend a lot of time on plan Bs and plan Cs about like what other things they might be doing, I think that's one thing I would recommend people to stay away from. Focus on your core. One source of confidence in any conversation is seeing the other person as just another person. At the end of the day, the interviewer is just another human being. There's no need to overshadow that. This is not Columbia Business School interviewing you. This is just a person. That institution, the load of that institution, the load of that expectation and pressure can sometimes bog you down in either being nervous or forgetting things to talk about. Sometimes you come out of an interview thinking, oh, I should have said that and I should have said that. More often than not, that pressure, that realization comes because you see that other person as the institution and not that person they are. So people are like people. They enjoy in an interview. It's good to establish, just like you would establish rapport when you're seeing anybody for the first time, just like any other human being. And I think that's important. Being comfortable in your skin. Those things are, I think when I think about these ideas of being comfortable, not being nervous, it comes down to not seeing the other person as representing the entire institution. Whether you're interviewing for a company or for the school, just seeing that as another person helps a lot. And then in my case, I had the opportunity to actually go to those locations to the US and get interviewed locally. If that is an option, that's always helpful. And the reason for that is there are more interviewers where the university is located. And so you get to choose from a set of people. You get to choose your interviewers more often than not when you're remote, even though you might get, I just feel that the choice of interviewers is more locally. You might end up finding somebody who actually has had a similar career trajectory as you have. In my case, it was somebody who worked in the luxury goods industry. The other thing is, I think it also reflects your commitment. I wouldn't say that you make it a point to get interviewed locally, but if it's an option, don't not do it just because of who's going to go to New York.
You talked about speaking with admissions officers directly, right? What do you think Columbia Business School's AdCom is looking for in its evaluation process?
So I asked that question straight, like exactly that, what are you looking for? And the answer would be they're not looking for what you've done, and how those things are obviously reflective of your character. But ultimately, their main goal is they want students who would be successful. And the criteria for that really comes down to, do you have clarity of what you are here for? Why are you doing the MBA? That clarity needs to be there. That the only answer that they don't want to gather from your application is that you're doing an MBA for an MBA's sake. Ultimately, it comes down to they need to find the first 700 people who know exactly why they're doing the MBA, or at least are able to communicate that.
And once you've crossed that hurdle, right? Once you know and are able to articulately convey what you're looking to do, what are some personality traits that you think they're really evaluating based on?
That's a longer list, but I think some of the more commonly talked about things are, how do you operate under uncertainty? How do you think about situations? Are you able to keep your focus on the larger picture? Do you get easily agitated? Do you get easily demotivated? Do you show really dedication towards what you said you wanted to do? The strength of your character comes through in how you make decisions in crunch moments. Really show your conviction, your dedication, and your commitment to what you said you want to do the MBA for.
Yeah. If we make it more real for our audience, right? Was there anything specific or any way in which you demonstrated that you doing that in a crunch moment?
I mean, I think I'll come back to the example that I shared earlier about the decision I made, to close the startup versus trying to just keep it going when I knew that this is not going to work. And at that moment, being able to evaluate reality for what it is and not being swayed by short-term gains, that reflects that you have an ability of objectively assessing a situation and making a decision the decision needs to be the best decision in that situation. Typically, when you analyze something, more often than not, more people will come to the same conclusion that this is the best course of action. Like in hindsight, it's like everybody, I think, would agree that that was the best decision to make. If you objectively remove yourself, your personal gains from a situation, and and what would you advise somebody else to make a decision in that situation, and when you do the same thing that you would advise somebody else to do, then that reflects consistency of character, consistency of application of thought process. For example, when you make a decision, let's say I wanted to launch my family's business in the US. And so every individual I spoke with would be a person who would help me forward that cause, that goal, or would help me gain some insights that would help me take that goal forward. I wasn't talking to a capital markets professor at business school. I was talking to the luxury marketing professor at business school. I wasn't talking to students belonging to venture capital groups at Columbia. And so those decisions reflect that you are dedicating all your resources that you have, which is your time and effort and energy, towards one single goal. You're not getting swayed by attractions here and there. You're not already trying to hedge your bets in your actions. You're all in, and that dedication shows. Everything you do has to again serve that one purpose, and it'll show through the stories you tell, the connections you make, the networking you do. Every action that you do should reflect that one specific thing. And I think it comes down to that consistency. You're showing that the most crucial resource that you have is your time and energy, and you are putting that in one direction. People who evaluate your applications, they are evaluating several thousands of applications. If there is more than one message that comes across in your application, it's not something that gives me confidence as a reader of your application that you really have put in the effort and thought process behind what you're telling me. The admissions officers would talk about things like strength of character, cultural fit. I think most of us would actually fit the culture. We are regular people. We treat each other with respect. We work well with other people. It's harder to just to say that I work well with teams. Can you demonstrate that? And I think these characteristics are a set of desirable characteristics that we would want in other people whenever we work with them. Finding stories that reflect all those characteristics about you in your own experience. They don't need to be high impact situations where you move a big organization in a different direction, in a positive direction. Ultimately, it comes down to how are you as an individual, growing yourself in those things and towards the desired characteristics. We all know what those are. We all want to be with somebody who treats you with respect, who works well with other people, who has conviction, who is consistent in what they say, and what they do reflects consistency with what they say. And so all those we know those characteristics. And do we live by them? And when you live by those characteristics, you will find ways to demonstrate those characteristics through your own personal stories.
Okay, so now, Gaurav, moving to some questions about Columbia, right? So, what, in your view, is Columbia Business School's unique identity?
So I think Columbia does a great job of offering resources of a wide variety. For me, I was looking, it's not necessarily like luxury marketing is not necessarily a very traditional MBA. People who go into this industry are not necessarily going through an MBA program. It's not a traditional MBA industry. The people working in the industry are not necessarily have MBAs. I meet with a lot of senior executives in luxury retail space, whether they are decision makers at luxury stores like Neiman Marcus, Saks Fifth Avenue, Bergdorf Goodman, or they are senior executives at Tiffany's, Cartier, these luxury retail brands. That I always knew that would be a challenge to find those resources, but Columbia has a way of attracting those resources, those people, whether they are adjunct professors, guest lecturers. There's a program at Columbia called the Entrepreneurs in Residence program, which I think was absolutely fantastic in terms of a resource. It allows MBA students to book 10-minute coffee chats with senior executives who dedicate their time to students of business school. And this program attracts senior executives from all industries. There were people who are leaders in clean tech, there are people who are leaders in venture capital, and there were a couple of people who formerly headed retail stores in the US, luxury retail stores. And so I remember January 9th was when my program began, and January 19th is when I had my first coffee chat with the president of a luxury department store in Connecticut. I simply just booked a 10-minute appointment with him, sat across with him and told him exactly why I was here and what I wanted to do. And in February, I was already talking to the decision maker at their store. And I think in March, we already launched our collection in their store. And things move really quickly. And there are two aspects to it. One, Columbia has that resource. And B, that was the only thing I wasn't thinking, who should I meet? There was no question about it because I knew what I wanted to do. The choice was already made for me. And it reflects when you meet somebody and the first thing you ask them is like, this is what I want to do. Can you help me? There is no two ways about it. It's a yes or a no. And more often than not, it's a yes. When you ask a specific question, which is relevant, which the other person can actually help you with. I think being in New York City obviously creates much more of an opportunity for Columbia to provide those resources for you, because most industries, their leadership do have some nexus with New York, whether they live there or they travel a lot to New York or they are in New York for whatever reason multiple times a year. I remember like our classes would have every other day, there would be some senior executive from some industry, which is either directly linked to what I'm doing or what I would like to learn about, was in Columbia Business School talking. And then before and after those sessions, if you are so inclined and if you make the effort, you will use those resources for your personal goals as well. And people are open to helping. I remember my favorite story is about how our business I can actually dedicate the 100% of the success of our business to Columbia Business School. And it's not a hyperbole, because there was the gentleman who was then the president of, he has been the CEO of Cartier, of Harry Winston, of Van Cleef & Arpels. These are like luxury jewelry companies. Any jewelry company wants to be like, that's like the highest echelon of luxury jewelry brands in the world. Here's this guy who has been the president of 3 of those, and is currently the president of like Graf Diamond, which is at the time the largest, the highest. It's like the Rolls Royce of the diamonds industry. And that person was delivering a lecture in our class, just talking about his experiences and whatnot. And he wasn't even supposed to be there that day. Carolina Herrera, another brand, was supposed to be there, another executive, and she couldn't make it. And this person was friends with the professor, so he filled in last minute. He comes in, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I need to figure out, like, then I wasn't listening to anything he was saying in the class, because the only thing I was trying to figure out was, how do I get in 5 minutes with this person? And so essentially I was changed my seat. I sat next to the door. So when he was leaving, I just exited behind him and just followed him in the elevator. And I sort of told him, hey, I just really need, this is my backstory. Can you really help me? And that was a direct question. And he said, yeah, sure. Why not come to my office tomorrow at 4:00? And then I met with him, and he sort of gave me a couple of advice. And then he gave me a go-to-market strategy that this is what you need to do. And I did exactly that. And the rest is history. Today, we are, I think, a very successful brand in the US. The point of all of it is that the resources are like plentiful, and Columbia does that a very good job with that. It has infrastructure wise, I'm not sure how great Columbia Business School is now. They have a new building, and in terms of the amenities, whether they're like nice fancy classrooms or like big I didn't have that. We didn't have that at the time back in 2016, 2014, 2016 in Colombia. Where it really matters, which I think is ultimately people resources, access to individuals who can either give you, ideas, support, you can run your ideas with them, can give you guidance in your specific area of interest. I think that is what Columbia does a really good job of. Whether it was family business management, whether it was entrepreneurship, the kind of people they attract just by being Columbia Business School, the reputation of Columbia, as well as it being in New York City, logistically being easier for these executives to hop on, do a quick chat and leave. I think that is probably like the best offering that Columbia has. And then the other things, academically, the resources, like professors are a good mix of amazing professors and then regular professors, depending on what is being taught. Now that I, have friends from other business schools who have gone through the programs, those are fairly common across all business schools. I think it is just the variety and then just the sheer number of opportunities in terms of meeting executives and just people who are thought leaders in the specific areas that you are trying to work in. You could be trying to do anything. You could be trying to solve world hunger, and you will find somebody who's at the forefront of that initiative, who has some nexus with Columbia Business School. And the other thing I found was, so I could tell my professors that, hey, could you figure out, a way to speak with this person? And they will, if they could, they would make it happen. It all comes down to that for me.
Super helpful. And you talked about the masterclass earlier, right, Gaurav? So is that something you participated in as well?
Yeah, that was like the moment the applications opened up, I was ready. I knew what the application was. I was ready with my application. It opened up, I submitted it immediately. And I emailed Kelly, the professor, because I'd already attended her class and she already knew my goal. There was she already told me that, of course, you'll be in it. It comes down to, I don't even know if she read my application because she knew that this is what I wanted to do. This is why I was at business school. This class was the reason. So while it's a fairly competitive class to get in, they have it was a class with 12 spots from business school and 12 spots from Parsons Design School. It may have changed now. I was nervous when I was applying, but then I emailed her and she replied back, don't worry about it. I was immediately relaxed. And it's partly because of the effort I made of getting into the class beforehand, before even applying to business school.
Right. And can you speak a little bit about the class itself and how that helped you, or what you gained out of it?
So the gentleman that I met who helped me in the business really launched the business, actually came as a guest lecturer in that, as part of that class, the master class. Every class was basically, there were two great things about that class. One was the whole design of the class was around a live project. It's like a consulting project with a current business. I was working on a digital marketing project that Tiffany was currently working on. As part of the class, we would actually work with an executive team at Tiffany's. 2 students from business school and 2 students from Parson would team up. And there were 4 projects offered in that class: Tiffany's, Chanel, Hermes, and one more brand I forget. The point is to be able to work with current executives who are making decisions in the industry that you are trying to work in, to have multiple meetings with them and work with them on a project that eventually leads to recommendations that is developed by the students on the specific problem that you're trying to solve. I don't see any other academic exercise that would give a greater insight into what you're trying to learn. And so I think that class was just fantastic. I'm still involved with that. Masterclass is done by a group called Luxury Education Foundation. They do these classes in the US with Columbia Business School and Parsons Schools of Design, and then in Paris and Hong Kong with other business schools there. And I think it's a great initiative. I'm part of their alumni council, and now I'm part of their core council, which makes decisions. I've been involved with them, and part of the reason I've been involved with them is because I just feel so indebted to how much the LEF and that program did for me and my business, that I just feel compelled to be involved with it on an ongoing basis. And there are classes like that across all industries. I know friends who, whether it's investments management, whether it's consulting, whether it's corporate jobs corporate finance or marketing, any of those things, there would be resources, classes like that at business school that I would hear of.
Very cool. And you got to choose your project, or is that assigned to
Put
you?
in, the projects, you rank them in order of priority, and I got what I wanted.
And before we speak about the other academic engagements, Gaurav, just want to speak a little bit about the J term, right? So you pursued the J term, or the term which starts in Jan. So who is the J term right for? For what kind of candidates?
The way the J term is designed is essentially you do a semester of academic work during the summer, when typically an MBA student would go for a summer internship. It is designed for folks who are either not looking for a job, know what you're doing if you're starting a company already, or if you're working on something, or if you're going to go back. A lot of the students were people who were sponsored by their current employers to do an MBA. So that's one type of students who knew that after the MBA program, they would go back to their previous employer. The set of people were people who were starting their own companies, a lot of family business background people who were going back to their family business like myself. So those were the main types of people. However, I know J-term students from my class who went on to change their industries, and because summer internship, while it is very useful from the perspective of getting a job after business school, getting offers. Typically, people who would do an internship would get an offer if you do a good job, would get an offer from the company where you're doing the internship. And especially for international students, it is more of a sort of a cushion because getting a job and the visa process can be complicated if you intend to remain in the US after your MBA. Not having the summer internship opportunity is not necessarily a disadvantage if you're looking to change your industry or get a job as an international student after your MBA. And that's because, so I had set up my office right in the first semester. I set up the company in the US and I was working on the business as well. You can schedule your classes in a way that you can have enough time to do a proper internship during an academic section, during a semester. There's enough opportunities for you to design your academics calendar around an internship obligation that you may want to pick up. Like the JTEM, while it is designed for that, those specific types of career paths that I talked about earlier, it's not necessarily a no-go for people. Some people just want to get done with their MBA sooner. So that can be one reason. And that's reason enough. You can still get an internship, you can still get a job. And most people end up getting school year internships and then also getting a job, changing their industries as well.
And does CBS support J-term students in getting jobs? Like, are the recruiting resources available to J-term students as well?
Yes, all the resources are the same, whether it's fall term or J term. The only difference really is getting those 3-4 months off from school and then doing something completely on your own.
And can students get jobs in, say, consulting, investment banking, which typically they do require the internship? So do you think it's possible from the J-term?
I think it is. Like typically J-term students skewed older than the fall term students. So I was 29, 30 when I started the MBA program. I already had like 7-8 years of work experience. It was varied, but it was like, I was out of academics after undergrad. I had a fairly large gap, and that was typical of most J-term students. They had at least 6 to 8 years of work experience. And I felt like the students from the fall term skewed on an average slightly younger than the J term. And that could be a criteria, like that could be sort of like a reason why people who have more work experience typically seem more confident about landing a job. They've already gone through a couple of changes in career. They've done that in their past work experience. So they feel fairly confident that even a part-time internship would land them a fairly good job after the MBA. So it really comes down to how you as an individual in applying what fits your needs better, and you can feel fairly confident that all the resources that are available to a fall student, all of them, 100% of them, are equally available to J-term students as well.
That's helpful. And Gaurav, I don't know if you'd have a lot of insight on this, but still would love to know your thoughts on how important is it to apply ED, like early decision, as part of CBS's admissions process. And within ED, how early should candidates plan to apply? Like if, let's say, the deadlines are now in September compared to the October deadlines. So should it be like literally July as soon as it opens up, or August, or is it okay to apply in September as well?
If a school has a rolling admission system, the earlier you apply is better because you get assessed earlier. It's a double-edged sword though. So, and because sometimes schools are also known to like hold back decisions on certain applicants that they think are borderline yes or no, to see what more applicants would come through. I think the criteria for when you should apply really, obviously deadlines matter. When you feel comfortable that there's no more value add you can do to your application. My point is there's no point just sitting on your application and strategizing when to apply. It's like strategizing when to invest in the market. Nobody can really time it. When you feel comfortable, you've done your assessment, you've done your homework, and you think you have an application that conveys your story the way you want to say it, that's the time to submit it.
And switching gear to academics, right, Gaurav? In addition to master classes, can you share the academic highlights for you during your MBA? And it may not just be academic, it could also be experiential. You talked about EIR as well. So what else was really a highlight for you?
I think if you get into Columbia Business School, the one class you absolutely have to take is negotiations with Daniel Ames. I would recommend it to anybody, regardless of what you want to do in life, regardless of who you are as a person, regardless of what you know. That class is absolutely necessary. The other class I would absolutely recommend is Bruce Greenwald's class. He teaches value investing and he teaches globalization. And I don't remember the class exactly. Basically, any class that he is teaching, just go into that class, because I think the one quality of a great professor is that they drop ideas in the classroom that are pertinent, relevant to any industry. It's pertinent to how you think about it. Like the thought process is ultimately what really matters. There are certain professors who bring your attention to a way of thinking that you previously wouldn't, and it instantly clicked. At least it clicked with me, and no wonder they're the most popular class. It's very hard to get in. I think Columbia, and it's probably at most business school, they have students get like points to spend on classes, and typically these classes are very expensive in terms of points. Knowing what I know now after taking the class, I would have given all my points for those classes, and then whatever else is fine for the masterclass for these few professors. Columbia also has I have not done it personally because there was some conflicts with scheduling, but there are academic courses that involve traveling as a cohort to a particular country or a particular business for a week or so. I think my friends have reported them to be very useful classes. And then there are classes where there was this one particular class, I forget the name of the class. It was like personal development. The class ends with an offsite where the entire class goes to a location close by in a bus to New York, and we spend a weekend there as a cohort. The purpose of the weekend is not to like play games with each other and get to know each other better, but to actually share stories about yourself that really shaped you as a person. People are more open to share like stories about themselves, about things that have happened to them and the lessons they've learned that can really give you insight into fullness of life in general. And I think those things help. I talk a lot about, asking people for help. Part of the reason I do that is because there was a guy in that class who talked about his story about how he was never hesitant in asking for help. He just knew what he needed and he knew who was the right person to ask, but he would always not hesitate asking. He was, I think, right after college, he had joined some investment bank and the CEO was in the top floor of that building. He just got up on it and he was raising money for Boy Scouts of America or something. Just to give context, typically, fundraisers are like, if you get a $10,000 check, that's a huge deal for Boy Scouts of America. And then he just went and asked the CEO saying, this is like his first week or something. He just went up and said, I've been with Boy Scouts since middle school or whatever. And, I'm very passionate about what they're doing. And this is exactly why we're raising money. Can you make a contribution? And he just dropped $150,000. And he was that year the highest fundraiser for Boy Scouts of America. The point is not about the success. The point is about how many of us would be willing to put ourselves in a position like that to make an ask from somebody. There are so many reasons not to do this, not to make that. And the key point to take from there is like, if there's a good reason for you to ask, then you should ask, instead of focusing on why you shouldn't. And the other point is more people are actually willing to help than we imagine. And so it's stories like that can, make you think in a way that can have a profound impact on how you operate in your life, which I think is the true value of these experiences. You can get all the academic part on YouTube. Bruce Greenwald's entire value investing class, by the way, is available on YouTube for free. There are classes from professors on MIT and Stanford who have their entire classes on YouTube. The academic part is fairly commoditized as we move in a more connected world. It is the personal experiences, personal stories that move you to think in a particular way, that change the way you think. That I think is what a place like Columbia offers, because they bring in people from around the world with varied perspectives that you are in the same room as them and you can actually share those and learn from them.
And Gaurav, apart from these professors and courses that you talked about, are there any other star professors and popular courses that you may want to name?
I'll send you a full list from different industries. But from my perspective, those were like Bruce Greenwald, Daniel Ames, and Kerry were like, there is a base standard, right? When you go to a place like Columbia Business School, you can expect a minimum standard of academic excellence from all your professors. But then there are certain other professors who really add that X factor, that charisma, that compel you to think. I remember one of the things that stayed with me is, so Daniel Ames in his last class and I'm a huge fanboy of Daniel Ames. Like I'm in touch with him and he's a great guy. Even after business school, I would send him. So I would be in a specific situation in business. I'm negotiating a term contract with a new retail partner, or there's a conflict that I need to get out of. And so I would just email him saying, and he tells me to call him Daniel. So I said, hey, Daniel, do you, this is the situation. Do you have like 30 minutes to get on a call? And he said, sure, why don't we talk on Friday? Like, and they're willing to do that just because it's something that he can help with. And I'm making an ask. If you are genuine about what you're asking for, people will also be genuine about what they give you. Obviously, you have to be cognizant of how much you ask. You don't want to be constantly asking. In the last class, he said, if there's one lesson that I want you to learn from this, is that don't lie. And if you think about it, that's something very esoteric for a business school professor to say something which is like so idealistic. But at the same time, it is because it is so uncommon for professors to say something like that, it strikes you. And in that moment, you can think about it, like, what is it like longer meaning? What's like, and how does it impact you as an individual? At the end of the day, another point of these institutions is to create a generation of executives and world leaders who do the right thing. And so to have something as simple as don't lie, and it's a negotiations class, sometimes you use white lies to sort of get your way, holding back information and stuff like that. And he talks about those strategies also. But in the end, he says, don't lie. And so it's moments like those, maybe I'm a romantic, but it's moments like those that can give you insight into your own way of operating that I think can have a profound impact on how you actually build your career. I'm a huge fan. I'll send you a list of professors like that later on that you can add to this video later.
And Gaurav, you talked about your involvement with the Family Business Club as well as the entrepreneurship group. Could you share a little bit about, what kind of activities these clubs organize, maybe any highlights from your involvement there?
Sure. So the clubs would, have, again, it was mostly around arranging conversations with people who have been through this process of building careers and managing companies. And so they come in, and typically the advantage with clubs is usually in a more intimate setting. So you will be sitting in a group of 8, 10, 15 people. That's fairly intimate for an hour and a half. So you really have an opportunity to speak with them one-on-one, get some direct insights that are applicable to you specifically. I think those were great opportunities. The other thing, in terms of entrepreneurship, the one thing I remember was the Greenhouse program. It's a program where you apply, and if you get in, then you go through a course over an entire semester where you're meeting with other people who are starting companies. They bring in resources, and these resources are not just like academic in terms of lectures and whatnot. These resources are people that you may help you directly with the startup you're working in. So, for example, when I was launching our brand in the US, my application was like, hey, I'm bringing my family's business, but like I'm treating this as a startup because we are starting from scratch in the US. We have no resources here. Whether it is resources like getting companies who come in to give you a discount on their services, for if you need an accounting service, a tax management company, a logistics company for your type of business, whatever is relevant to you. And you can just ask the professor, I'm looking for this, and this, and they will go figure out in their network who are the right resources for you. That's like basically having a parent who says, hey, mom, I need this. Hey, dad, I need this. And they'll go find out. It's not that involved, but you get the drift. The idea is that they're there to help you. It comes back to the same thing. If you know what you want out of your business school experience, you will get it. There is no way. I would be very hard pressed to believe that you knew what you wanted and you went to business school, Columbia Business School specifically, and you came out without any help from the business. I would ask more questions about why that happened. I would reflect on what could I have done differently. I wouldn't put it on the business school.
Gaurav, if you could go back in time, is there anything that you would do differently to make even more out of the CBS experience?
So I don't have any regrets per se. Like, I would have done this. I think sometimes when I think about like what other things I could have done, like, and it comes on in a situation where you remember something specifically and you're like, I could have done that. It's not a constant regret in my mind, but I didn't do as much travel with my friends during business school. There would be a lot of trips, but at the time I was also working on the business. So I didn't have, sometimes time wouldn't permit, and I'm also generally lazy getting up and going to the airport, and those things I think I get sort of demoralized by who's going to go through all the hoops. I could have done a few more trips, and those trips help in forming deeper relationships with your friends, and so I could have done that more. Academically, the classes I took were like spot on in terms of what I wanted to. There were some classes that I could have, now that I think about it, some of the early classes, because I had an undergrad in business, some of the first semester is basically fundamentals. You study like all the fundamentals of marketing, finance, accounting, corporate finance, and stuff like that. I could have exempted myself out of those classes. However, I would put a caveat there that those are the only classes you take as a cohort, the 60, 70 students in that class. And so while, yes, you could have studied something else by exempting, you take an exemption exam and you can exempt out of those core courses and do something else. There's enough opportunities to do those things. I think the first semester really is about building some friendships. And so the more classes you take together, the more opportunities for you to like meet each other, hang out, socialize. I would think that, balance it based on who you are and what you want to do.
Gaurav, what's the biggest challenge you faced at CBS?
Deciding which opportunity to pursue. There is just so much to offer. Columbia has there's attraction, like at any given point in time, you would have to choose, do I go out with friends? Do I go to that conference? Do I go to that class? There's at least 3 to 5 opportunities at any point in time. Or do I just go home and relax? My point is, it's a good problem to have, but nonetheless, it is a problem because there's a choice. You always constantly second guess, should I have done that or should I have done this? Like not all choices are
Any
clear.
framework to kind of pick more
Framework
intentionally?
comes down to that, like why you're here. But again, balancing it with don't be completely obsessed with what you're doing, then you will lose out on some softer human experiences that are also important. So I think the framework is to be thoughtful. Think about not just the immediate experience of it or not checking a box. Just be thoughtful about, do I really think, if you have a good reason why you're choosing the option that you're choosing, that's probably a good idea. I don't know what else to say about being thoughtful than to just think a little bit.
Fair. And Gaurav, as an alum, how do you derive value from your engagement with CBS?
The one aspect that CBS could improve upon is alumni network. Having said that, I also think that I derive a lot of value because I built those connections while I was at business school, and I kept following through on those. So, for example, my nexus with I was in New York. I met with 3 of my professors over dinner. I met with my classmates, and some other people I had met during, who were executives and whatnot. Some of them are my advisors now. I meet with them on an ongoing basis. As an alum, I don't know if those opportunities exist because I'm an alum or because I did those things during business school. But the fact that I went to Columbia Business School is the reason I have that network and is the reason I'm able to capitalize on that. To be an alum and keep discovering new resources from Columbia Business School, that may not be as easy as it could be. And that's partly because it's just probably hard to manage an alumni network of several tens of thousands with varying degrees of involvement with the business school. But you have access to those resources. You have access to the directories. I can, if I need to, presumably look into the alumni database and reach out to people. Having Columbia Business School on your LinkedIn profile does compel a fellow Columbia Business School person to be slightly more empathetic or available for somebody who's from business school. So even now, I know of friends who have gotten, changed jobs, gotten new opportunities through the alumni network simply by researching the database. And all right, I want to get into film studios in-house. There are people who are working inside Paramount Studios, Disney, Netflix, and whatnot. And you reach out to them, and there is a more than average likelihood that they would respond to. If there are 2 people reaching out to them, one is a Columbia Business School graduate and one is not, and they are themselves business school graduate, they're more likely to respond to you. But it's very powerful though.
And Gaurav, as we bring the show to a conclusion, what's your parting advice on how incoming students can be better prepared to hit the ground running and succeed at business school, apart from what you've already shared, if anything?
It's very difficult to have one advice, but if there was one advice, I would say be thoughtful. I would caution against being indecisive. Being thoughtful is not being indecisive, and it's not overthinking about something. Being thoughtful simply means that everything we do, you think through the whys and the whats and the hows and all those things about that decision and the likelihood that you associate with the outcomes based on your actions. And so when we think about our life in those terms, we end up, you will see that the more thoughtful you are, the more the quality of your work, the quality of your decision making, all those things will improve. And it's not something that you can change overnight. It's a long process. All of us are working on it. So as long as we are working thoughtfully with the goal of improving ourselves, what are the things that we can do better? This is general advice that I think everybody will give. But I actually put a lot of emphasis on being thoughtful. Be as thoughtful as you can, be focus on that book. I highly recommend Start With Why. It did give me a lot of perspective on how to think about things. And it comes down to why are we doing what we're doing? For example, if the goal of doing an MBA is to go to the US, is it inspiring enough? Why would the US say, all right, you come just because you want to be here? There needs to be something to your ask. This is more than just yourself.
Thank you, Gaurav. This has been one of the most thoughtful episodes. This really gets to what you've been trying to do. So I really, really appreciate you taking so much time, even with the tech glitch we had in between. So thank you so much for your patience and for a really, really fabulous session. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I mean, I thank you for this opportunity. Whatever I can share with anybody, I'm very happy to do those. So this is for me. This is also an opportunity for me. So I feel good about it. So thank you.
Thank you.